I'm sure you've noticed that life often throws us some curveballs at some very inconvenient times. Well, we're going to get some advice on how to roll with the punches today. Joining us from Virginia is Vonna Laue. She is the CFO at the Evangelical Alliance Mission and author of Glad I Didn't Know: Lessons Learned Through Life's Challenges and Unexpected Blessings. Vonna, it's great to have you with us today.
It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Vonna, your book highlights the unexpected and often challenging circumstances we face in life. What's this been like for you?
Well, I think I'm probably not unique. It's probably the same for all of us. And there are a number of seasons and challenges that we go through. I like to refer to it as the seasons of life, right? If you're
Mm.
going through something pretty easy right now, it's like, well, enjoy summer because fall and winter are on the way and you're going to have challenges and difficulty. But I found looking back on those that in each one of them, I was able to see how the Lord had worked and that there were lessons that came out of that that I'd have completely missed out on if I hadn't gone through those difficult times.
So, how does God work in the twists and turns of our lives, even in our painful experiences?
Sure. Well, there are a number of them that are highlighted in this book. In fact, the way it's done, there are 32 short chapters, and each one of those is the story of someone. Half of them are mine, and half of them are someone else's, and we can get to that. But each of those is a story about either a challenging time or an unexpected blessing. And as we go through those, we find usually not till the very end or sometimes months or years after that the result of that was God's blessing. Some of those stories, you'll see that the result of that was a friendship that never would have happened before. One of them, in my case, was it's how I came to Christ. And if I had not gone through the difficulty of growing up in a divorced home and moving a lot, that was exactly what he used to take me to a Christian school and a godly family that kind of took me in and brought me to the Lord. So there are blessings to be seen if we're willing to look back and see those.
And you describe yourself as an extremely analytical and not a very emotional person, but apparently something happened to you along the way that began to change this. What was that?
Well, I have often said, I think if you did an MRI, I don't have the creative emotional half of my brain. I'm not even sure if it's there because I'm as you said, I'm a chief financial officer, right? I'm very analytical. But as we went through difficult times, especially a number of years ago, losing my brother in law to cancer, um, that caused me to step back. I'm a planner, and you probably have some viewers that are planners as well. And everything needs to be orchestrated just so. And I realized I don't control that, and I'm not able to plan everything. There's someone who's more in control. And so as we went through that and then ultimately lost him to cancer, I remember thinking, okay, we just need to deal with this, get all of the house sold and all of the belongings taken care of. And my husband said to me one day, there are going to be emotions involved in this. And it just struck me that I was willing to just check things off a list and miss out on how I could minister to those people that were around me and understand not only did I have emotions, but there were a lot of emotions involved by other people. And that's true of many of the challenges that we go through. And it gives us the opportunity to invest in people that have been put in our path.
And losing a loved one can can take a toll on you. So, what were your emotions?
As we were going through this, and it was a time in life we were fairly young, we had a 2-year-old daughter. We were living in Colorado, he was living in California. So we were commuting back and forth. And I remember being with the CFO actually at Anne Graham Lott's ministry. And we were having dinner one night, and she said, "Tell me what's going on in life." And I think it was probably the first time that I stopped and really was allowed to accept what my emotions were and just talked through what I was learning and what we were going
Mm.
through. And I'll never forget, she looked me in the eye and she said, "You're learning lessons that I was in my 50s before I learned." Now, my response was, "I'll wait. I'd be happy to just wait. I don't want these 25 years earlier." But that was such a um, message for me to understand that's a gift. And I'm able to take these lessons and use them for decades beyond what some other people are able to do. So certainly the emotions ranged from, frustration to sadness and deep grief and anger and inadequacy and all of those things. But at the end of the day, the Lord was sufficient and He was faithful and He was just calling me to be obedient one step at a time.
And you suggest that all families have dysfunction. How did dysfunction in your own family impact who you are today?
Well, I was raised by two parents as a single child, and my parents had a really volatile marriage that ended in divorce when I was just 8. I like to tell people that try to figure out personality by birth order. I was an only child, and then within 2 years, my parents both remarried, and I was a middle child in two families. So there was a lot of dysfunction to be had there. But it was through those things that, first of all, I thought I was the only one. I was young, I was a child. And then as I got older, I realized, no, this exists in some form in nearly every family. Maybe it doesn't look like divorce, and maybe it doesn't look like moving from being an only child to, having siblings and two households. But there are a variety of ways that families suffer and have difficulties that they have to overcome. And so being able to again be open to how can I help others that are in similar situations, and to know God didn't abandon me. He didn't give me something that I couldn't handle. He was walking alongside me, even as a child in those situations.
And you mentioned divorce. Why do you say that divorce follows kids through the rest of their lives? Like, what's the long-term effect?
Well, it's the most prominent, right? When they're young, and now are they going to be with mom or are they going to be with dad? And packing a suitcase every weekend. That's what we always think of when we think about kids of divorce. But you fast forward, and eventually those kids are going to get married. And then mom and dad have to behave themselves at the wedding. And who's going to walk the bride down the aisle? Because now there's a dad and a stepdad. Those are things that don't get easier. Uh, Holidays were always difficult for kids of divorced parents, right?
Mm,
Well,
yeah.
it's not any different when they're adult kids. And then what made me say that in the book was working with aging parents. And so when you've got one parent that's in Virginia and one parent that's in South Dakota, that's a whole different set of challenges that you wouldn't have if they were together in the same location and caring for each other and just needing some supplemental care.
And what do you mean by quotes, the pain, strain, and uncertainty were constant and sometimes extreme?
Well, that comes out of a series of events that took place within just a few months. I felt led to leave the job that I had been at for 20 years and really felt like that was a matter of obedience, but certainly was difficult to do that. So stepped away from that job only to then have that followed up by our oldest daughter having a significant sports injury. 2 weeks later, our house flooded, and then lost my stepdad unexpectedly. And so, over the course of 3 or 4 months, had all of those things happen. And so, that quote comes from that time, but it was also an opportunity to step back. And again, I would come back to that idea of control, to understand I'm not in control. God is still good, even if this is painful. And there are circumstances that he takes us through. So that's my encouragement to everyone, everyone that's listening, and everyone that might read the book. That your circumstances, God's not caught unaware by those. And when the strain and pain seem so difficult, there's still hope and a future.
And your book doesn't just draw on your own experiences. What are some of the other stories you highlight, and how can they help the readers?
It's fun. I was afraid as I got to the end of writing the book, where I'd written all the chapters, that someone would say, well, that's fine. That's how God worked in her life. And they wouldn't apply it to themselves. And so, as a result of that, I set aside many of the chapters that I'd written, and I invited 16 other people into the process to share their stories. And when they committed to being part of the project, then I prayed for them each day until they gave me their story. And didn't tell them what I wanted them to write about. And so it was with a little fear and trepidation that I might get, 7 stories about cancer, or 5 stories about wildfires, or, whatever the case might be. But each of the stories is unique in and of itself. And it's so fun to see how the Lord wove those together. So there are 3 stories about people coming to America, and that might be the most common theme that's in there. And they're 3 incredibly unique stories, from a teenager coming with $100 to a mining executive leaving his job in South Africa and coming here, to a business owner in Ethiopia having to flee as a refugee to the United States. So a variety. There are medical situations that are spelled out in there, and um, different family challenges. So one of the things that people have said is, you read this book today, this one particular chapter might stand out, but if you pick it up again in 6 months or a year, it may be an entirely different story just because of where you are in life.
Now tell us about your miracle baby and how that impacted your faith and family.
So our miracle baby is our youngest daughter, who was tried to be born 4 months early and was born 3 months early in the
Wow.
neonatal intensive care unit. They say that they have early babies and sick babies, and they told us your daughter decided to do both.
Oh,
So
wow.
she had significant medical needs. And one of the things that we found when we were in there is, in the neonatal intensive care unit, there are a lot of teenage moms, oftentimes a number of drug babies, just a lot of family situations that are difficult. There were very few intact families there. And so we had the opportunity to minister to the other families that were there, as well as the medical workers. But I will say that there were times that it was so difficult as you're watching your child, um, truly at times on the brink of life and death.
Wow.
And so for me, the lesson was that there were people around the world that were praying for her and praying for our situation. And so at those times that I felt like I couldn't even pray, I was too close to it. It was okay. And it was like the Lord said, relax. Other people are praying. And I knew that I was supported by those. And that was just a huge faith builder. I know that not all challenging circumstances come out favorable. And I just mentioned that we lost my brother-in-law, but I'm very happy to say that our 2 pound, 8 ounce baby is now 22 years old, graduated university a year early, and has no lasting effects. So it was a really difficult time, but that one has a really happy ending this side of glory.
That's amazing. Wow. And when our life is in chaos, we often think that we're the only ones. So,
Mhm.
what would you say to those who feel isolated and alone in their pain?
Well, a couple of thoughts. One, I really came up with that idea is sitting at a stoplight during a time that we were caring for my brother in law. And I was probably running an errand, but I remember sitting at the stoplight and looking around at the other cars and thinking, life is normal for everybody else today. Every other driver here is just going about their day. They're going to McDonald's, they're going to work, they're doing whatever. And life is not normal for me. And that was a really difficult time to go through. And so now, literally, there are times where I sit at a stoplight and I look around and I think, life's not normal for somebody here, and God be with them. But the other thing that I've just thought of in the last year or so that's been such a comfort is, I remember when our girls were little, and I would tuck them in, as most parents do, and we'd pray and sing, and then I'd tell them I loved them and say goodnight and walk out of the room. What I've been impressed upon in the last year is that, Jesus tucks us in every night and he says, I love you. And he doesn't leave the room, and he's right there. And so even in these stories and Glad I Didn't Know, I think that's kind of an underlying theme, is that Jesus hasn't left. He's right there in the midst of either the unexpected blessing or the difficult challenge that we're going through. And that's my encouragement to everyone today.
Amazing. Vonna Laue is the author of Glad I Didn't Know: Lessons Learned Through Life's Challenges and Unexpected Blessings. Vonna, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.